The following episode of Critical Weeb Theory is going to have some mild spoilers to the following anime: Akudama Drive, Moriarty the Patriot, Code Geass just a little bit, Log Horizon, and that time I got reincarnated as a slime. If you wanted to go into these completely blind, I would suggest skipping this episode, but there's no spoilers in here that would ruin the experience for you, we don't think. Regardless, make sure to check out today's guest, Amuramuraz, in the description of wherever you're listening to this to. Yeah, that's it. Have fun.
Hello.
Oh, we're doing
Hello.
this now.
Are we all recording?
I am recording now.
Okay. See, this is the thing that Rockford does. They just start the podcast. I'm like, oh, okay. Cold open.
Fair enough.
Well, it's because we chat to get ourselves warmed up, and at a certain point, we reach the point at which it's okay, cool. This is a natural segue from one into another.
It is indeed a natural segue.
Yeah.
So, hello.
This week, did you like the guests we had on last week, which will come up day after tomorrow as of time of recording? Say yes, you assholes.
I'm a time traveler and I've already listened to them. What?
Aw.
Huh? Who said that?
Nice.
Got a spooky guest in here.
Weren't they informative and entertaining?
This week we have Amuramuraz. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I can do this. Hey, I'm Amraz. I use any pronouns except he. What else goes in an introduction?
It's like my pronouns plus
Yep,
she.
pretty much. She's a cool pronoun for me. I like it.
Yeah, hell yeah. In fact, I based my pronouns after after Amr changed her pronouns to anything other than he. I was like, yeah, I would be anything good with anything other than he or she. So in truth, I copied her. Anyway.
Thanks for coming on. If you want, you can take a little bit to tell us what you do online, and then of course at the end you'll have plenty of times to plug any specific projects. Go into.
Sure. Most people who would know me probably know me from stuff around the tabletop RPG scene. What don't I do? Someone please help me. I don't know how to say no. I do game design, podcasting, streaming. I try to write a lot of games from story games to crunchy games. I do freelance writing. I go on streams to talk about colonialism and Orientalism and racism, TTRPGs. I do podcasts for fun because I like them. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And really cool. And I have to say, they are probably one of the only people, along with Raghav and I, who have listened to the hidden very first attempt at recording CWT.
I did. I listened to it a couple times.
And she gave us so much amazing feedback that we made it better. And we made this.
Yeah.
So
you can,
the show wouldn't exist without you.
You can thank me for all the good things and then blame them for all the bad. There isn't much anyways, but if there is, you can throw it their way. But you can give me the praise. Thank you. No.
Yeah, listen.
Yes.
It was
any imperfections of CWT is because we haven't been able to implement her vision.
Yeah.
So
Honestly, it was a lot of fun to get to listen to those early episodes because it's just a lot of fun to listen to those two speak. And if you're here, you probably agree with me because they have insightful things to say.
Oh.
Or you're here because you think Amr is really cool, in which case I agree with you. She is really cool. That we were actually just talking about this just before we started recording, and I think it's actually worth talking about here because if you've been listening to the CWT podcast at all, one of the things we love to do is random real-world events. Woo!
Should we do a random real-world event depressing segment? I'll make a little jingle for it.
It leads really nicely into our first topic. So how about we take a few moments to talk about the George Floyd Act that just passed.
The House.
You-
Yes, the
Passed
House.
the House. I haven't read it. I read the minimum wage bill, which is struggling to get past the House because Democrats are legitimately, they are evil, shameless ghouls.
Yep.
The last thing they want is to be in power. The George Floyd Act. In a nutshell, what it does is it gives, it's like the Justice and Policing Act of 2020. No, wait, no. 2020, it died, right? So they reintroduced it. And it just gives police like millions of dollars to investigate themselves. But they can use 95% of the money not doing that. So it just gives them more money.
It bans chokeholds, but this neglects the fact that chokeholds have been banned in places like NYC, and they were still used anyway. And it also neglects the fact that George Floyd was not killed by a chokehold.
Banning chokeholds has always been a weird thing. Like, people have wanted to ban chokeholds ever since, like, Eric Garner. But, like, chokeholds were banned when Eric Garner was killed with one.
There's also the fact that, like, pretty much, despite this being, like, functionally just more funding for the police, the overwhelming majority of Republicans voted against it, I assume for any association with George Floyd and anything resembling oversight.
It's definitely a cultural and political signal to their base more than an actual practical thing. Which kind of, to be honest, shows how, like, frustrating Democrats are, because they're constantly, like, eager to compromise and move to the right to get something that Republicans will vote on. But Republicans don't vote on ideas.
No.
They vote on, like, culture bullshit.
Yep.
Right? It doesn't matter how much funding to the police you put into your anti-police bill to get some Republicans to sign on to it. They're not going to sign on to it because the title says police oversight bill of blah, 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 blah. Right? So why are you even bothering? Right? Like, what? Of course, we know why they're bothering, because they do just want to give more money to cops. Right? But, like, it's insulting that they pretend the reason why they do that is because they want to compromise with Republicans. Just be honest. Just be honest. You're a ghoul. You can tell me. It's fine. I already know.
I was talking about it earlier, and I will continue to say it now. It is absolutely evil how a mass uprising that, at minimum, demanded a defunding of the police had its figurehead strapped to a bill that increases funding for the police. It does the literal exact opposite of what was asked.
Does that mean that's like, I specifically requested the opposite of this?
Yeah, so, and that just felt relevant to talk about here, both because I know it can be tempting to be like, oh, well, you know, we passed the George Floyd Act, so the demonstrations over the past year were for something. But no, what does that act actually do? It doesn't mean anything if it simply has that name.
Right. Okay, we'll keep an eye on it. If you follow me on Twitter, you will see my snarky responses to politicians, which is my favorite kind of tweet.
Yeah, I guess the final focus is, like, I feel like what this bill kind of really highlights, if you haven't already picked up on it, which is the entire U.S. politics is Republicans and Democrats arguing over the optics of being progressive and not and conservative, rather than having any fundamental difference in policy.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It is. I mean, it is the reason why we see now, like, Republicans want, like, a commission into cancel culture, and how the far left, they're coming for Dr. Seuss. Ooh. Like, the reason why is because, like, the culture war, they fucking I fucking love that shit.
Well,
like it's the fumes that give them life, you know.
They're worried that we went after Dr. Seuss, so Susan can be next.
This is why we love Ummer on this show.
Bad jokes? Thank you. I have a lot of them.
I'm still absolutely losing it over. I'm sure glad we elect Joe biding his time to avoid filling any of his campaign promises.
I will be calling him Joe Biden until the end of time and encourage you all to do the same.
Yes. I would say I will do it until he achieves at least one campaign promise. But let's be honest with ourselves, right?
I feel like we're being pretty fair to him. We're simply saying, listen, we know you're a piece of shit. Just at least the things you promised to do them. And he doesn't even do that.
See,
We're not,
because it's like,
we're holding you to the standards you set yourself, not even the standards we'd want to set for a president.
it's like, okay, here's a massively popular, low effort thing you could do. And then all of like the people were like, and we were like, well, Joe Biden's not going to do that. They're like, it's fine. We'll settle for less than what we wanted, but still non-zero. And we're even having trouble getting less than what we wanted and still non-zero. And this is, I think, a severe problem with like the constant shifting of goalposts, right? Of like, we need 100 and we should be fighting for 100. We should not be like fighting for 1. Right. Like,
Absolutely.
We needed so much more than $2,000 stimulus, and we didn't even get that. Now and they didn't even just give us 1,400 stimulus. They're making us fight for that. And obviously, of course, like, the stimulus itself is not the...
I love my means tested stimulus.
Oh my god. And obviously, it's not even...
It's a whole song now. I'm sorry.
And obviously, it's not even like just that the stimulus, it would have been the solution. And if we had gotten a $2,000, $5,000, $10,000 stimulus, everything would have been fine. That's not what I'm saying here. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying here is that not even that, right? Not even a tenth, not even 100th of what is needed, right? Not even 100th of what is needed is even being offered, much less being fought for. And so other people have said it. I will also say it. If anyone says this has been a good presidency, it hasn't. And also, because I love to quote Umar on this, because it is one of her best quotes, when people tell you who they are, listen.
I've definitely heard that and stole that from somewhere, but it is a good line.
Oh, I just keep attributing it to you.
I will. I mean, that specific phrasing might be mine,
no.
but it is a concept that I feel like the more common phrasing I've seen is like when someone shows their ass look.
When someone says they're a professional shitbag.
Yeah.
Anyway, speaking of policing and the ways in which movements can be co-opted, Akudama Drive.
This time. This will not be the last time you hear about Akudama Drive on CWT.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even the first time. But Akudama Drive.
Yeah, Akudama Drive is a show that I watched because Raghava here was like, we're gonna sit down and watch this, and I said, I have no idea what this is about, and they said, sure, it's fine, just watch it. And so we watched it, and it was fantastic.
It was really great. It's a really special show. Essentially, it's a cyberpunk action romp with really bright neon colors and it's like a really memorable art style. I need you to look up Akudama Drive and just like look at the pictures that come up. Here, I'm gonna do this right now. Hold on. Wait, you can't see me do it. But yeah, it like looks, I think, fantastic. But more than just looking fantastic, it is what would happen if anime was running at 11 all of the time.
Yeah.
Like, if it was if it was constantly just firing on all cylinders and never not trying, what it's about is even better than what it looks like.
Yeah. I feel like the two things you need to know about Akudama Drive going in are that one, it is a show that cares not at all about logical consistency, but thematic consistency. Throw out all your preconceived notions about how things should work and just enjoy it for the messages it is trying to tell you.
Absolutely. It will pull out random bullshit twists in the middle of episodes. It will jump the shark, and the shark will go into a rocket.
Yep.
And the rocket will fly away, and you'll be like,
and then they'll do a somersault over the rocket, and it'll turn out that the somersault over the rocket flew into the moon and blew up the moon.
And you'll just be like, what? Why? And the answer is because it looked fucking awesome.
Yes.
All the somersaults, that was badass. And you want to see the somersaults again.
But the other reason is because the somersaults were a metaphor for the human condition, and the metaphor actually works really well.
Yeah,
the other thing is Akudama Drive is two shows stuffed into one show. The first half is a heist anime.
Plus episode 11.
Plus episode 11. We don't.
Okay, I know y'all. I enjoy episode 11. I know y'all have feelings about it. I enjoy it. But the first half is a heist anime. It is a heist anime for 6 episodes. If you like heists, if you like cyberpunk, if you like cool action sequences, you're gonna have a great time with a heist anime. And then the back half is a serious drama exploring some real freaking heavy and important themes.
Mm-hmm. So I think maybe a bit more of an explanation to the plot would be good, and then I think the two themes that we might want to focus on today are colonialism and just some of the role that the state, the role of the state in assigning criminality, I think would be the two things that we talk about. So
Yes.
Akudama Drive basically follows 12. They were 12, right? I feel like that's too many. A handful of some of the worst criminals known to this world, called Akudama, and they all have powers, except for our protagonist, Swindler. She accidentally stole 5 yen or something, and then she gets lumped in with all of these hardened criminals who have all these amazing talents to dismember people, to punch really hard. One of them has a bike. It's a cool bike, to be fair.
It's the best character on the show.
It's the best character on the show. And essentially, they're all hired by a mysterious black cat to commit a really a really grave crime, not against any people, but against property, which is a theme we'll see a lot. They need to steal essentially an offering from the government to the colonial government in the show, and that kind of brings us to the second intriguing part of this setting, is that it takes place between Kanto and Kansai in Japan, where there was Japan had a civil war in the far future. A bomb, a very special and powerful bomb, left much of Japan uninhabitable, and Kanto now rules over Kansai in a way that is very, very similar to U.S. occupation in Japan. And the characters have to navigate through all of that. It's for a 12-episode series, it is really, 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 it touches on so many different political aspects of life. It's you have to watch it.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about the colonialism, imperial elements more, but I just want to say that is not even the main theme of that show. There is 2 or 3 themes that I would put as much more central to what the show tries to tackle, and they all have to do with criminality and what that means.
Yes. Yes.
and
Right.
it manages to do all of them somehow. And once you watch the show, you'll realize that it's more relevant than you could even realize.
Yes, yes. It was a very strategic way. I think more than just that, like Akudama Drive, I think, especially in the context of the George Floyd protests and other uprisings against the police, like it just plays really well with that. Either they like wrote Akudama Drive in less than a year, in which case, wow, or like the timing just happened to work out. But in either case, like,
I think the timing definitely.
let's talk about
just happened.
criminality.
Yeah.
Let's talk about criminality and criminalization. What does it mean to be a criminal?
Well, should we give like a theory-based answer, or should we give at least?
We should.
Okay. A criminal is someone who has broken the law, which is a deceptively simple description for what a criminal is, specifically around the word law.
Yep.
Who makes the law, number one. Who enforces the law, number two. Someone who, a boss who underpays their workers, or who fails to do overtime pay, is a criminal because they have broken the law. But they're very, very, very unlikely to be arrested, because the people who enforce the law do not enforce that one nearly as much as they enforce the law when, say, somebody like a poor person is on heroin, or when a houseless person is like dumpster diving or something like that.
I feel like it would be perhaps more apt to say a criminal is someone who is prosecuted for breaking the law.
Yes.
Because you can break the
I
law
would-
and not be a criminal if you are not caught and or charged and or I guess prosecuted might not be the right word, but like penalized maybe. I'm not 100% sure. Yeah.
I would give my answer as a criminal is someone considered a threat
Yeah.
by the state.
So we have like these multiple, I think, competing definitions of criminality, and they all sort of they're all sort of based on like one key component, right? And the component is that like to keep in mind that like we don't choose. Okay, no. Let me start over. The point is that it's not like a natural thing, right? It is being a criminal is like a social construct, and it's constructed by a group of people with power to wield it against people who do not have it.
Yep.
This is something that a show like
Death Note.
We've uttered
gotta
the
do
name. We've uttered the name. I know. We've talked about this once before, but it's like the main problem with shows like Death Note, with a couple others whose names are not coming to mind immediately.
Code Geass. Sorta. Code Geass's problem is not with criminality, but with terrorism. Yes.
I mean, to
anyway.
speak from like a genre I'm more familiar with, pretty much the entirety of superhero fiction in and out of anime.
Oh yeah.
Ooh, you wanna break that down real quick, because I know that's something you're very like well versed in.
Yeah, I mean, so like superhero media is I'm not gonna go over like the entire history because like then you have to get into stuff like in the U.S. it was originally written by Jewish people as like a form of protest. But superhero in its current iteration in things like anime specifically, like two of the most popular superhero media in anime currently, I would say, are My Hero Academia and One Punch Man. Right, those I think are the two. If you're aware of anime superheroes, you are probably aware of those two. You might even be only aware of those two. Mo has written an excellent essay on My Hero Academia and the sort of conservative politics there, but the central kind of conceit is that being a hero makes you good and being a villain makes you bad, and vice versa, right? And criminals are dictated by the state to be worthy of being beat up by heroes, and heroes beat up criminals to preserve the status quo in the state, rather than doing what heroes in a show like Black Lightning do, and fight for change of the status quo.
Dare I say, heroes in a show like Akudama
Yes.
Drive.
Oh yeah.
And so the reason we had to have this entire discussion of criminality beforehand is, one, because everyone in Akudama Drive, our main protagonists, have been assigned the label of criminal. And a major central point of the show is sort of breaking down how little that word means. Our main character, Swindler, becomes labeled as a criminal by accident, and yet the repercussions of it cause her to go into to understand of how and even like much later, there's a specific thing I want to reference, but I don't want to do big spoilers or anything, of how the state uses its authority to decide who is and isn't criminal as a way of not just exerting, but justifying its power. Criminality, as presented by Akudama Drive, is a moral justification for the exertion of force.
And I think perhaps the most interesting part about that with Akudama Drive is Akudama Drive asks the question, what does it mean to be an Akudama, both explicitly and implicitly, a bunch of times, and it gives us a bunch of answers. And the answers can coexist, but they're not necessarily the same answer. And what's really, I think, interesting about the show is it doesn't posit one as necessarily more right than another, right? It gives us a bunch through actions and through people explicitly saying it, of different reasons why someone could be an Akudama, what it means to be an Akudama, and it lets you sit with the messy reality that sometimes there isn't just one clean answer to a question about like complex social issues.
I will be clear that the show does recognize that who we would consider as the bad guys in the conflict are indeed the bad guys. Like the state are the police are the bad guys.
Yep.
Our heroes are the good guys. It's rather the nuance comes not in is the status quo good or bad, but rather like the way we conceptualize what is happening to our protagonists is where the gray comes in.
And
Again, to like draw a really quick parallel to Death Note, that's like a key distinction of Death Note's question is, what is the most appropriate way to deal with all of these bad people? Whereas Akudama's Drive's question is the much more important and much more relevant. Why did we decide these people were bad again?
And there's and so like this is where Akudama Drive gets really neat, is that it's nuanced even in that, because some of the people who are labeled Akudama get revealed to be people who cause meaningful, tangible harm to other folks in society, and like abusers, and like obviously there's a lot of talk there about restorative justice and like the fact that the solution there should be to rehabilitate them, not brand them Akudama and execute them in public. But it also shows that like, yeah, there are people who will still harm other people, but for the most part the ultimate harm comes from the state. And the nuance there as well comes really interesting, tying this back to colonialism. When we are first introduced to our sort of state-sanctioned executioners, who are literally called executioners, they're introduced using the imagery of Imperial Japan.
Yes.
Yes.
That's really important.
Yes.
It's really important, and they will consistently use Imperial Japanese imagery for a lot of stuff with the executioners, with how their headquarters are. The Japanese opera masks are used for the Kanto people when they're talking to the executioners. There's a lot of Imperial Japanese imagery that is tied with the explicit villains, and the Japanese media struggles with erasure of Japanese atrocities and war crimes. I mean, I've not watched Attack on Titan, but I know that is like one of the major criticisms there, right? And that's generally a problem with anime. And this is a piece of media that shows that you can critique the colonialism and imperialism done to Japan by Western powers, such as the dropping of the nuclear bomb by the US, while also critiquing the harm Japan itself was doing during and before those eras.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would just add a minor addendum of, I feel like this is just a consistent thing, not just with Japan in specific, but across all cultures. The US, for example, all US, UK, France, basically every single country that was at one point a colonial power has had trouble, or has perhaps deliberately obfuscated the lasting effects of its colonial power. Yep.
We are barely taught we are taught that U.S. has colonies in schools, for example, but we are barely taught the extent of that. It is made to seem like a minor blip as a consequence of the world wars, and not the history of colonialism, oppression, and exploitation that it actually is.
Yes.
We're never taught to really grapple with what those colonies mean, and what that means for the ongoing growth of global U.S. hegemony. Colonialism and colonization are always portrayed as things that happened in the past and won't happen again.
But Akudama Drive, as both Amber and Rock rightfully pointed out, it makes you reckon with it almost. It makes you ask questions, which is one of the smartest and best parts about the show, is that it's a show that forces you to think about the present, about the state, about the relationship between the powerful and the powerless.
It does all that while also having some of the most kick-ass action sequences I've seen in media.
So cool.
It's a visual spectacle on top of everything else.
Mm-hmm. It is refreshing to see an anime actually handle a lot of the themes that we opened this podcast with, and also be incredibly fun, it's just everything about it is really good. There's not a part of it that isn't. There's not a part of it that just flat out doesn't work. Right, just all around, conceptually, artistically, musically, except for the OPM. I'm not really a fan of the OP, but everything else about it just.
The only thing I would add is if you do go to watch it, I would say there's one throwaway homophobic joke or two in the first couple episodes, and CW for sexual assault at the end of episode 8. It is one of the few sexual assault scenes in a piece of media that I will watch, because it never progresses further than the threats of it. It is not done gratuitously, and it is handled well and is used to give agency to a character rather than take it away from them, is I guess the way I would put it. And that is
that was the
rare.
The one thing I wanted to put is that it centers the victims of the attack rather than the people, because there is someone who does come and help the person who is being attacked, towards the end of the scene. But it really is about the person who is attacked, and about how this person fights against it and overcomes the threat, and not some objectifying paternalistic bullshit that we see in a lot of anime.
It does not victimize her.
Mm-hmm. And when she later faces an even greater abuser, she overcomes that through her own agency.
Kills the guy. It's so good. It's Akudama Drive has so many scenes of people viscerally stabbing their abusers.
Oh yeah.
And I love the show for that.
This is one of the reasons I'm not too, because we do have another. We will talk, like I said before, we will talk about Akudama Drive again. And one of the reasons I'm not too concerned about it is that there is just so much in the show to talk about. We're not going to run out of shit to talk about. We could do a multiple podcast sequence just on Akudama Drive if we really wanted to, and not one of those episode by episode things.
We could spend more time talking about Akudama Drive than there is time of Akudama Drive, just because of the word association you can do as up front for talking about abolition. Speaking. If you're here and you're watching anime and you're interested in abolition as a concept, there's an idea for you. But I digress. Speaking of imperialism, colonialism, and criminality, let's talk about another show that stars criminals. That's right, Moriarty the Patriot, which I think also critically, as a part of the story, asks the question of what makes someone a criminal, and also provides its own thesis as an answer.
And the thing about Moriarty is I watched the first episode. And I was really, really, really skeptical about Moriarty Patriot. Because the description is kind of deceptive. It describes it as like a reverse true crime sort of thing, where like Sherlock Holmes's villain like wages a war against the nobility after he's like personally mistreated by them. And this is like my least favorite trope, right? It is it's basically like Lelouch, right? Okay, we're gonna get to Code Geass, right? But it is a lot. Like,
unfortunately, if only we could not.
if only we could not, but we will. But it is like it is one of those deals where like one of the people from the higher part of society like paternalistically goes down and says, I will save all the inferiors from their oppression and make a new world where I'm in charge, right? And I hated that. So I thought Moriarty Patriot is going to be that. One episode goes by.
Fun fact about the first episode of Moriarty the Patriot is that it wasn't even in the manga.
Yeah, the first episode of Moriarty the Patriot is actively harmful to the rest of Moriarty the Patriot. Start Moriarty the Patriot from episode 2. Like, just skip it. Don't watch it. Just skip it. It's fucking awful. So first episode of Moriarty Patriot goes by.
It's not just awful, it's like completely unnecessary.
First episode goes by, and I'm like, this is okay, I guess. It wasn't as bad as I thought. Second episode goes by. There's a new intro talking about how, like, at the height of the British Empire, like, the difference between the rich and the poor was staggering as, like, the British Empire colonized, like, 1/4 of the world, and how the aristocracy is, like, building, like, a rotten world where, like, the poor starve while the rich eat lavishly. I'm like, what? Where did this come from? Hold on.
They just explained colonialism better than every single teacher or professor I've had except, like, one.
Where was this? Why didn't you start with this? But
like, lead with it. And from that point on, I fell in love.
We can talk about imperialism, and we will talk about imperialism, more specifically capitalist exploitation, as it relates to Moriarty the Patriot, because that's a very important part of it. But I want to start our conversation of Moriarty the Patriot by leading off from the Akudama Drive conversation we just had, of talking about how Moriarty the Patriot is a story about criminals.
Yeah.
People... Yeah.
I was going to say, I think we should start with giving a quick summary for the listeners.
Yeah. If you're familiar with Sherlock Holmes, it's Moriarty from Sherlock Holmes. Moriarty is a criminal consultant. That is, he gives advice to criminals as to how to best complete their crimes. And you might immediately think, wait, that sounds like a bad person thing, until you realize that Moriarty the Patriot's criminals are overwhelmingly working class people using crimes to get back at their bourgeois overlords.
Yep.
And resoundingly, Moriarty the Patriot's answer to who is a criminal is anyone who is a threat to the bourgeoisie. That's the definition it works with.
It is the only anime I've ever seen that uses the term mutual aid correctly and in text.
Yep.
That is how explicit Moriarty the Patriot is in its leftism.
Yep. Moriarty the Patriot is really cool because, like, I come from the perspective of... Let me not mumble over my words. I come to it from the perspective of someone who really loves the genre with all its flaws. Like, I'm not a super big Sherlock Holmes fan, but I have read every single Hercule Poirot novel. I enjoy Agatha Christie's writing style, even with a lot of the flaws there. And as a lover of the genre, this show does everything I enjoy with the mystery, thriller, suspense genre, while also bringing in good politics.
It's another as like a similarity to Akudama Drive. It's another show that it shows an incredible amount of thoughtfulness into like the politics of the show and how that relates to politics in real life. For a show that is really, really obvious. Like, neither Moriarty the Patriot or Akudama Drive, like, pretend that they are something that they're not. Except for the first episode of Moriarty the Patriot, which absolutely does try and pretend that it's not actually, like, based on
But if you watch it
continuity.
knowing what it's going to become, and or watch it once you know what's going to become, you see the roots of it still there. It's just not as explicit.
It's just, like, they tried to hide it in episode 1, but they couldn't. Because it is like a bright light and, like, trying to cover it out with, like, masking tape or something, you know?
The best part of Moriarty the Patriot is that Moriarty in Moriarty the Patriot doesn't manipulate people, he gives them agency.
Yes.
That's
doesn't-
another foreshadowing to quote Code Geass, but okay.
He doesn't... Yeah. I mean, like, in the same way that how can you talk about Death Note without talking about Akudama Drive, because they just complement each other so well. How can we talk about Code Geass without talking about what Code Geass wanted to be, Moriarty the Patriot? And that is to say that in a show like Code Geass, which we will get to talking to, our quote-unquote evil protagonist who does crimes basically decides what everyone else should do, and then they do what he says, or they don't do what he says, and then they die. In Moriarty the Patriot, Moriarty himself does not ever go to someone and say, you should kill this person. He goes to someone who wants to kill that person, but doesn't have the means to do so, and uses his privilege and his intellect to give them the means to accomplish what they want to do.
That's the really cool part about Moriarty the Patriot, right? Is at the end of the day, the focus in Moriarty the Patriot, in its revolutionary message, is about giving agency to people and or making them realize they held the agency all along, right? Because one of the greatest impacts of colonialism, capitalism, imperialism, what have you, is actively stripping people of whatever agency it can and making people think they have no agency with whatever they have left. It's a twofold thing, right? Because there is an element of it that is actively take away people's agency, that limits their ability to act, limits their access to resource. But there is still an impact of, like, there's a reason why anti-strike messaging is so strong, because striking is still a, like, thing that we have the agency to do as a society, that they have to convince us that we don't have that agency. And Moriarty is about building the class consciousness to realize, no, hey, we can actually make an impact.
Mm-hmm.
It is literally like Moriarty's plan, right? Like his big evil scheme. Sorry, I've been watching too much Phineas and Ferb. But his big evil scheme is literally just we can't do like a revolution on our own. But if we can get as many people as possible to realize that a revolution is necessary and possible, then they can do a revolution. He's basically this is like I'm not like extrapolating or anything. He says this in as many words.
Yes.
It is a story about class
Moriarty the
agitation.
Patriot is not at all subtle about what it's trying to do.
Yeah,
So
there's
when
no
you
reading
say,
into this.
It says this. It says this.
And so there's actually a reason kind of both Akudama and Moriarty is there's a really interesting contrast in how they both approach this. Because neither of them are subtle shows with their theming, but they're both not subtle in different ways and subtle in opposite ways. In that Moriarty very explicitly tells you its message. It has one goal, one theme that Moriarty and his associates will constantly restate and make explicit to you. Right?
The oppression of the lower classes by the upper classes.
Yes.
Like they just say that.
And specifically that we are going to give people the agency to overcome that, and repeatedly shows us that. Its subtlety comes in the ways that it shows that even the system that is supposedly benefiting those in power can still harm those who aren't at the very top of the power, right? It is still a harmful system to everyone. There's one episode in which a person who is born into, like, the middle class of the aristocracy is specifically manipulated and has their life fucked up because they do things that are not in line with the perfect image of the aristocracy, and Moriarty gives them agency to realize that as well, right? It's the same way, like, we talk about, like, sometimes we talk about patriarchy as a thing that most directly harms women, right? That is what it does. It marginalizes and harms women and other folks of marginalized genders, trans men, non-binary folks, genderqueer folks. But it also does harm cis men. Toxic masculinity is a thing that causes physical harm to a lot of people, but it can also harm the people who internalize it, right?
It can harm the people who internalize it. It can harm like the people who fail to live up to it. And so on and so forth.
Yeah. On the other hand, Akudama Drive is not at all explicit in giving one message or one theme. It throws a lot of themes, and its subtlety comes not in like, and it throws them in your face, but its subtlety comes in how it gives you subtle and nuanced understanding and answers to those themes, even if it never gives you like a single core message that it's like, here we are spoon feeding you this revolutionary message like Moriarty.
No one stands up and goes, hey, it turns out that the way we treat criminals is fucked up, yo.
Yeah. It lingers on the question, are Akudama bad? For all of like a second when it's asked, and then cuts to the next scene, right? It puts its message up front, but it never spoon feeds you the answer, and it forces you to think about it, like you all mentioned earlier.
I would say Moriarty does not make you think, and that's not a bad thing. It just sort of tells you. It said, okay, I need to read some of the lyrics from the OP Dying Way.
Very good.
Because like what the second that they actually put subtitles for the OP, I was shook. Like,
yeah, they're really fucking good.
Like
While
it says,
you find
quote,
that, I want to
no, I already found it, but
oh, go for it.
okay, what do you want to say? Okay. But like the words, right? Like bloody world, the dystopia without light, okay? The flowers won't bloom while being oppressed. Instead of standing and watching, let's start to put an end to it. Okay? It's just telling you, please do a revolution. Please. Like please change things. We cannot continue to live like this. Shed that tears to stop tragedy. Shake off, the heart will be filled. When you lose your okay, maybe don't literally lose your life, but you get what I mean here.
Yeah. The thing I wanted to say, and this is a bit of a carryover from an older point, but Moriarty himself in this version is, one, an adopted commoner, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing is, he is, I think, the only example of the good noble trope I can possibly think of. Oftentimes, when we have the good prince, or we have the good whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fundamentally, the good royalty just is royalty who has better ideas than bad royalty. But good royalty never puts power in the hands of people who are not nobility.
Yeah.
Moriarty in Moriarty the Patriot is a good noble because he puts power in the hands of people who are not the aristocracy.
Exactly.
Literally, he gives them agency, and that's what makes him a good noble.
I'm actually going to push back a little bit, because I don't think Moriarty is the only good noble.
No.
I think we have to talk about his brother. His
adopted
brother.
Absolutely,
I don't mean like Moriarty's the
Yes.
only good noble in the show. I mean
Oh, sure.
Moriarty the Patriot, the
Yes.
show.
I just...
Yeah, but talk
I think
about his brother.
his brother by adoption is actually really worth talking about with the good noble trope, because he is a more stereotypical good noble trope, right? In that he is born into nobility. He is from the family that Moriarty gets adopted into. But like Moriarty, he focuses on using his power to give agency to Moriarty. He provides a really interesting model of what allyship can look like, because he comes from privilege. He's only known privilege, right? But what he uses that for is to give resources and backing to Moriarty, and values Moriarty's perspective because Moriarty has the lived experience.
It is not how these stories about privilege often end up of, well, Albert the noble knows what to do and thus does what he thinks is best. It is Albert puts his power behind the people who know what oppression is like, and Moriarty in turn puts his power behind the people who know what oppression is like. It is really wild to me how this show is one of the few shows about like liberation that is not chauvinistic. It is not people who have never understood oppression talking down to people who have lived through oppression their entire lives. Cough, cough, Code Geass. It's the entire show. Yeah.
Is it time? Is it time to
Before we go,
transition?
We don't have to talk about Code Geass in detail here, especially since we haven't finished it. But
Yeah.
if you follow Mo on Twitter, you've seen his tweets about it. You've seen that Code Geass basically.
I cannot believe those threads do so well. I don't. Y'all really hankering for someone to take Code Geass to task. It's fine. It's fine. I'll do it.
But it's literally like
So why I'm
Code
here.
Geass was written from a liberal centrist perspective who has never seen a single revolution. Who hasn't even studied one revolution.
They read about revolution on the back of a cereal box, and they're like, "This sounds cool.
And it's like,
I could do that."
and we could spend an entire episode dissecting Code Geass, and we will eventually. But critically, for our purposes, as a contrast to Moriarty the Patriot, there's a moment in Code Geass where they're like, the oppressed masses, they don't like being oppressed, but they don't like resorting to violence either. Which is just a really arrogant thing to say that you could only say if you have never studied how oppressed masses behave when presented with a revolutionary army.
I mean, unlike Moriarty the Patriot, which is like the people yearn for violence, actually, because in truth, this is not like a childish thing that Moriarty does at all. It's actually like an extremely mature thing that it does, because what Moriarty recognizes is that there is violence already being committed against the working class. There's one. I hope this isn't too much of a spoiler, because we're trying to stay as spoiler-free as possible here, but. There is one scene where there's like a working class person whose child dies of an illness that could have easily been prevented if they had access to healthcare. But the noble who was in charge of them didn't want to waste their doctors on a sick, poor child, and the child died. Right? And Moriarty the Patriot treats this as equivalent to the noble just killing the child.
Yep.
And so the noble ends up dying in revenge. Right. Because it is. That's maturity. Code Geass will have the exact same situations. And Code Geass will basically say, well, technically, I mean, it's not his fault. He wasn't the one who did it. So, I mean, they're, like, innocent. And, it's like,
Geass invisibilizes the top-down violence, whereas Moriarty the Patriot, in its unsubtlety, makes the top-down violence incredibly visible. And the one last thing I want to say about it is Moriarty the Patriot recognizes that oppressed people yearn to retaliate, but are prevented from doing so by the state, police, social centers, the lack of means.
Yep.
And what it does is it says, okay, I will give you the power to fight back. Like we've said before, right? That's what's going on in this show.
Yep.
Good show.
I would, if you're still not sold on the show, I'm gonna give you my two pitches for that I think would convince people to watch the show. The first is, if you've ever watched Leverage and you enjoyed it and wished it was slightly less liberal leaning, that show about people stealing money from rich corporations to give back money to the folks who got screwed over, watch Moriarty the Patriot. If you loved Leverage, you're going to love this. And if you were disappointed with Leverage not going far enough, you're going to love this. My second pitch I would give is, it does, I think, what every good adaptation and or retelling of a fiction story should do. It does the thing that the Watchmen short series does. It takes the story, it retells it with modern politics, and it alters the fiction in interesting ways. It is a retelling of Sherlock Holmes if Moriarty was involved in every single Sherlock Holmes story. Because in the middle of the show, they switch to telling classic Sherlock Holmes stories, like A Scarlet Letter. But they tell them as if Moriarty was involved from the start, with the politics of Moriarty. And that is what a good adaptation should do, right? It should bring something new to the table for a piece of media.
Recontextualize.
Exactly.
That you
That's
think
the
that
word.
you know.
I will go a step further to not just talk about how Moriarty gets involved in Sherlock's business, but Moriarty gets involved in Sherlock's business for a very specific reason.
Yes.
That works thematically with what the show wants.
a lot of worse shows have no good reason as for why Moriarty would want to be involved with Sherlock Holmes other than a creepy obsession.
Yep.
Moriarty the Patriot has a very salient and relevant answer as to why that would be the case.
Yep.
Good job,
Also,
Sal.
it makes all of the characters hot anime boys.
I was about to say, anime boys. They also
They're
really
so
nail.
fucking high. Like, okay.
Yeah,
I still have to write my 100K fanfic of Sherlock's ex
It
Moriarty.
really nails,
I wish
like,
you
the-
were the one I was chasing after.
Oh my god. they
That's
do
a
really
line
nail
from the show, and it's really good.
They nailed the two most important things about Sherlock Holmes. One, that he's a fucking disaster. He is a mess who's falling apart at all times. And they nailed that. Two, the homoerotic tension he should have with Moriarty. They get both those things. What more could you
Yes.
want? You know, ignore my other pitches. It has homoerotic Moriarty and Sherlock Holmes tension. Go watch it. There, sold.
They made
Pack it up.
Sherlock Holmes a fuckboy.
He is such a fuckboy. They made him a full fuckboy. They watched. Someone watched The Mentalist, realized how shitty that show was, but were like, what if we made that dude the antagonist and turned him into Sherlock Holmes? That's what this is.
I need to find what was my tweet that was like me when I realized ACAB means
Means
I have
Sherlock
to shoot
Holmes.
anime fuckboy Sherlock Holmes.
Yep, I found it. Gonna-
But
Oh, oops, wrong tweet.
alright.
But
But while we're on like this bit of like talking about, are we done talking about Moriarty the Patriot, by the way?
I think so. I think we
so.
are moving on to the
So,
last thing.
Speaking of Moriarty the Patriot, and one of the things we just talked about was the application of modern politics and an outsider's lens to the problems of a group. And we talked about how Code Geass does this very poorly because Code Geass's protagonist. I have no problem spoiling Code Geass because it's terrible. But Code Geass's protagonist, Lelouch, is an outsider to the Japanese Liberation Front, and yet the show frames his outsider's viewpoint as somehow more morally justifiable, and in a way, he ends up committing colonialism upon the people he's supposedly liberating from colonization. And you look at that and you go, this setup isn't really that dissimilar from an isekai setup of we have this person who came into the isekai from out of the isekai. Now they're going to solve all of the isekai's problems. And I know this because Amr brought it up to me once a while ago, and I was like, that's so smart. And I literally like messaged Mo that day, and I was like, Amr's so smart.
She is though, so it worked out.
Yeah, it was really good, and since then I've always wanted to hear you talk at length about this. So
Let's see how much length I can give to this talk. So I guess to give
long
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah, I mean, so to give some context, I have watched about a half dozen isekai at this point to various degrees of completion. Ignoring the random isekai episodes of Pokemon, because I've watched almost every Pokemon episode, and there's somewhere they just randomly isekai. I'm currently watching Spider.
I need to
I've
catch up on
watched
Spider.
some episodes of Bookworm. I've watched the season and a half of Log Horizon. I am caught up on Slime, including the current season. I should probably actually give these full names, huh? Okay, let me do that again. So I'm currently watching.
So I'm a spider. So what?
Okay, honestly, they don't have names beyond Spider. Like, the time I was. So what? I'm a spider, right? Okay. I'm currently watching. So what? I'm currently watching. So I'm a spider. So what? I've watched. Ascendance of a Bookworm. I've watched about the first half of the first season. I'm currently caught up on the time I was reincarnated as a slime, and I have watched a season and a half of Log Horizon, and I'm loving it. And me and my friend are they're rewatching it. I'm watching it for the first time so that we can watch season 3.
Mm-hmm.
Don't.
Sorry, I'm distracting you.
Okay. But one of the things I noticed, and it struck me most directly when I was watching Bookworm, is some of the colonial implications of being in an isekai. In that you are a person coming to a world that is often fantastical in some way, but usually, with what fantasy tropes imply, behind technologically of where our world is. And so you are possessing a lot of knowledge that world does not possess. And so you are in a position to restructure that world into being the world that you know of, right? Bringing in your knowledge to show the people who are uneducated relative to yourself what your superior knowledge can bring. I'm just going to leave that sentence to hang for a second.
I mean, it's an unexplored aspect of isekai. I know because I haven't explored it.
Mo, the only isekai writer out there. Or sorry, Mo, the only isekai criticism writer out there. There is no other.
There is no one else.
So I guess the thing that I noticed is that there's different isekais handle it to different degrees. And I think I'm going to put them into like 3 categories. There is the isekai in which the protagonist acts in a colonial manner, like Bookworm. There is isekai in which the protagonist actually doesn't do that. The protagonist acts within the bounds of the world, but the world is constructed with a very colonial framework. That's anime like Slime and Spider. And then there's anime that tackles it head on. And I'm going to call this category Log Horizon. It's just Log Horizon.
it's the only one.
Before... I'm sorry, are you in the middle of a thought?
No.
Okay. I was just going to say, before we get too far deep into the weeds of isekai itself, I want to talk about how isekai inherits a lot from adventure genres, and adventure genres inherit a lot from colonialism. I know this because back when I was still like actively designing tabletop RPGs, I started work on a travel game because I love travel games like you talk about. I love adventure games. I started writing it, and I went all of a sudden, hold on, this is just a colonialism. Because implicit in a lot of like adventure and exploration narratives is the idea of, oh wow, look at all of these new places with all of these foreign people. I can like take their culture
customs.
and impose my will upon them, right? But if we look at a lot of like early adventure fiction, one, it has British origins, and 2, it like really taps into that feeling of, I'm gonna go out to the colonies and see things which have never been seen before, ignoring the fact that there have been people there the entire time living long and complicated lives. And this, again, to tie this back into isekai, 1, a lot of isekai fundamentally inherit from that trope of, I am an outsider, and now I am here to go on an adventure through this wild and wonderful world. And 2, this world starts being relevant the moment I enter. Until then, it was like nothing of note was happening, but now that I'm here, things are. I just wanted to like give that framework because it was just something I was like. Adventure stories are inherently colonialist. A lot of isekai are adventure stories, therefore.
To just a brief thing on this to bring this to more of the type of criticisms that people who read my work would be familiar with. Okay, that was a bad way to frame it. I just want to like bridge what people might be familiar with the things that I say about isekai to this new conversation on colonialism, and then we should go a lot deeper into Log Horizon because there's a lot of good stuff going on there. But so like a lot of like the most problematic aspects of isekai actually come from this colonial framework. So for example, if you think about like Shield Hero, for example, like why is Shield Hero why is, for example, Naofumi allowed to morally get away with owning a slave? And like one of the big reasons, it's actually the reason that he cites, is that we're in a different world now and they have a different culture. a culture that I'm using, a backwards culture that I'm using to my benefit. Like, if there's like eighth son, are you kidding me? Like, where the dude's like married off to like a fucking child with incredibly large breasts. It's a thing that happens. It's kind of creepy, but like, why is it justified? Well, because we're going out to this new external culture where this thing is okay, and we are picking and choosing the parts of the culture that we want to preserve and the parts of the cultures that we want to like replace with our own. There are many more examples like this, like Konosuba. You want to talk about the succubus brothel. You want to talk about like a lot of isekai are just like externalize the things that I want to like a weird and exotic thing, a weird and exotic culture that I can treat basically like Legos, you know.
Actually, we should probably cut this in like way before we get into this. For those who are not familiar with the word isekai, it means otherworld.
I hate it when we do this.
Okay.
There's always one.
But hold on. If you manage to get this far as an anime fan without being familiar with what isekai means,
congrats.
It took me a while to
How?
You won. You won. No. You won. You did it.
But I feel like we should probably give people explanation, and if not here, it should be sliced in earlier. But isekai is otherworld, and it. Oh, good.
what?
You said like you were gonna say something. Never mind.
No.
Oh, okay. Isekai it means, if I remember correctly, otherworld. Literally what it translates to, right? And it's essentially a genre of fiction where a protagonist comes from one world, usually our world, into a different one that often has fantasy elements. A lot of prototypical ones will have like MMO-ish elements, like Sword Art Online, or will have like more traditional fantasy tropes, like Shield Hero, because I'm going to just name bad ones right now. Don't watch those two. Save yourself the trouble. But that will be the thing. And isekais will have a lot of tropes from different video games. A lot of them will have skill systems or level up systems that are just
Classes,
lifted from your favorite video game.
Stats.
Yep.
Like Konosuba is based on D&D, which is why it's bad, because D&D is also...
Oh no.
That's allowed.
There's an entirely separate conversation. I wish we could have this conversation right now, but I feel like
If you guys start going
Umber has to
heavy-
leave in half an hour, so we literally do not have the time to get into stats are eugenics, but
Yes.
stats are eugenics.
We might get a little bit into it.
Okay, let's get a little
So
into stats are
let me.
eugenics.
But before we get there, so back. Okay, but we'll make it into that later because I kind of have a little bit of lead.
Go.
The sort of categories. To start with a sentence of a bookworm. It's a really cute slice of life anime of someone who really loved books in our world, spent her entire life reading and learning things, and then dies and becomes reincarnated in the body of a small child who's living with some sort of disability or chronic illness that they don't particularly clarify early on. But it's a really nice slice of life show. It has semi-positive depiction of disability, I think. Like, I haven't gotten far enough to see if there's any real problematic stuff. There's some stripping of agency, but for the most part, it's a solid depiction of living with chronic illness in a supportive environment, right?
I will say, having seen the first season and the beginning of the second, I think it's overall pretty good. And also, like, knowing that a lot of the Anifem contributors do vouch for the show. On that from that point of view.
Yeah, it's a wholesome time. Like, I watch it if I want just like a chill episode that requires not a lot of focus. However, it falls into a problem, like issues, real quickly when the main character starts telling the people of that world how to use the stuff that is theirs. Right? She teaches them how to properly use their fruits or their technology to do stuff because she has knowledge from her world. And that's actually a kind of complicated topic to talk about.
Hey, you person from the global south. What are you doing not embracing neoliberal capitalism? Haven't you heard that neoliberal capitalism is the best and most effective way of organizing human societies? And I clearly couldn't be wrong.
Yep.
I do have Amr, please finish. But I do have an example, like a real world example.
Of this
exact
I think
thing.
it's harder to draw a direct parallel with isekai because you can easily say like, well, if you were born in a world that didn't have access to 21st century technology and you could construct it, would you not attempt to construct an engine and like recreate the luxuries you had? And to an extent, yes, but there is the difference between sharing the knowledge you have with you and telling people how to use their knowledge. And I think Bookworm errs on the wrong side of that, and a lot of isekai tends to, where the protagonist knows better rather than the protagonist sharing and like exchanging, like participating in cultural exchange.
Literally just compare to Moriarty and just we don't have to say it again, but just compare to how we talked about like the way Moriarty interacts versus like how Bookworm is being described.
Yep.
So the real world example that I had, and perhaps I will send this to you just so you can see it, and perhaps I'll find a way to include this in the episode too. But when the British colonized Ghana, they found obviously they had like the steel plow, they had the ox, they had like industrial farming.
On the YouTube screen during the YouTube video, and for people watching on a podcast, we'll put up a bit.ly link
I'll figure
in the description. Yeah.
But anyway, the British, they had like these big like industrial farming techniques, and when they got to West Africa, they found people planting yams in Ghana by hand in these little mounds going across. And the British came, they said, obviously these Africans, they don't have the technology that we have. They don't have the industry that we have. Clearly, they just don't know that it's not efficient to plant things by hand in little mounds. What you have to do is you clear an entire field with a steel plow and plant things, and then you can grow them. So when they colonized things, they were like, okay, listen, you're going to stop doing all this, and we're going to bring you all this cool and wonderful technology that we have to plant 1,000,000 times more yams than like your puny technique can do. And so, you know, they didn't really have much of a choice. It was do that or like be shot. So like it was still a colony, right? So that's exactly what happened. The British tried to replace mound farming with industrial farming, and it worked for a little while until the rainy season came and washed all the crops away, right? And so it turned out that the reason why this culture of mound farming in West Africa had developed was not because black people were stupid and did not have technology. It was because they had learned already to adapt to their environment. And this was, mound farming was actually like one of the most like well thought out ways to farm in the region, right? And obviously now we've like developed technology to overcome these challenges. But the fact is that like every single culture, regardless of like technological level, like has the intelligence to work around the limitations that they have. So to say that like a culture in isekai simply does not know how to best use their resources given what they have is like a colonialist fantasy. Every culture knew. Yeah, it's chauvinism. Every culture knew what they were doing. Even if they didn't have like steel or they didn't have like cars or like fancy roads or whatever, every single culture had like a really good reason why they didn't have that thing.
Also, I want to again like tie it back to like our earlier bits of the episode, and like when we go back to talking about like, for example, Code Geass is the epitome of this chauvinism of it creates a situation in which the Liberation Front cannot succeed because it literally does not understand the goddamn thing, and it needs rational big brain Lelouch, the colonizer, to come in and tell them how to do a revolution properly.
And to the credit of Bookworm, there are a lot of parts where the person realizes that just possession of knowledge does not translate into being able to do anything with it when they lack experience applying the knowledge and also lack experience that the people of that area possess. And she has to lean on them more and more in their knowledge and experience, which is one of the things that gets right, but it is not 100% perfect.
And even like when we criticize a thing, it doesn't... I deal with this a lot. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like when I criticize things, people, the takeaway that they get is that I'm calling the thing like if I criticize Bookworm or whatever, people say, okay, Mo thinks Bookworm is classist, right? And that's like not... that's not really like the full extent of the take. It's like Bookworm does a thing. Some of it is good. Some of it falls into tropes. Let's talk about it. Let's have a conversation. You know.
No, Bookworm is classist. Cancel Bookworm.
Cancelled.
I think, I think there's also a difference between saying, hey, this thing is guilty of a harm common in the genre, and this thing is exceptionally bad for what it is, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's a difference between saying Bookworm falls into some colonial harms and Shield Hero sucks, right? They function on different levels.
You'll know. If I
we're
come for
having
Bookworm,
a conversation
you'll know.
on Shield Hero, the only acceptable way to have that, and also Redo of Healer, the only acceptable way to have that conversation is the ways in which those shows are failed.
So to tie us back in, let's talk about eugenics. That's a light, easy transition. So when I talk about colonialism in world building, a huge portion of that is eugenics, and I think Slime, as much as I enjoy it, is really guilty of this because Slime does a thing
Before we
where
get into Slime, do we have a moment to like really talk about like the direct links between eugenics and colonialism?
Does someone else want to take the wheel on that?
Sure, I'll start. Colonialism is built on superiority, often racial superiority. Eugenics is, in a way, if you don't know what eugenics is for some reason, it is the art of basically talking about genetic superiority of certain things. It is essentially a pseudoscience that is used to say this group of people are somehow are better, not for socially constructed reasons, but for biological reasons. At its worst, it says things like white people are inherently more good and capable of more moral and more good things than black people are.
Yeah.
Black people are inherently evil, white people are inherently good. And there are lots of different ways of doing that, but oftentimes the reason why eugenics and colonialism go hand in hand is because eugenics is a justification for colonialism. If we look at something like the white man's burden, the white man's burden says white people are so much more civilized than black and brown people. They're so much smarter than black and brown people. And that justifies them asserting their will upon black and brown people because they just know better.
Mm-hmm.
And so by accepting that premise of eugenicist premise, like that's what allows it to do that. And again, I don't want to talk too much and cut you off, but I just want to say like that's why when I say stat spreads in RPGs are eugenicist, and that eugenics is tied to colonialism. That's one of the many ways in which isekai, even some of the good ones, reinforce colonialism because they just say some people are better than others, and the follow-up to that is those some people should rule.
Mm-hmm. And there are two sort of ties to that is like that affects a bunch of other concepts like things like social Darwinism and phrenology, which is the study of skulls. And one of my favorite fun facts about language is the phrase highbrow, which is to like say something is more classy or highbrow. Like,
wait, is that a skull thing?
Yeah, it's a phrenology thing. So white people were like studied to have eyebrows that were held higher, and so that was a sign of intelligence. The term highbrow is a eugenicist term.
It's working back from the conclusion of we have decided white people are smarter. Let us find characteristics of white people that make them smarter.
A film YouTuber I really like called Kyle Colgren has a channel, Brows Held High, and he talks about it in a video about how he chose that name because he wants to challenge the idea that people are inherently born highbrow, but rather that like choosing to analyze things is a thing anyone can do. It is not a inherent thing where you are more classy by birth. You can be whatever you want to be. If you want to be analytical about movies, you can be. And that's actually a perfect transition into Slime, because Slime has a thing where when creatures receive names, they evolve. They become boss monsters, which is a cool like carryover from like video games. Like if you have a named enemy, it is always stronger than a non-named enemy of an equivalent type, right? That's a neat thing. However, what happens as you watch it more is that the creatures that evolve to become more human. The final state of evolution is to become humanoid and then human, and to have human characteristics like breasts or, six-packs or whatever, right?
The sexy
And so-
times.
Slime is interesting because Slime operates entirely within the framework of the world. He acts. So the time he's reincarnated as Slime, he's reborn as Kirby. He's just reborn as Kirby and gains the power to eat anything and gain their powers. He's just Kirby.
Okay.
It's actually really fun. It's silly. And he does that a lot. And he operates entirely within the framework of the world, very rarely bringing in his outside world knowledge. And he builds a village using the resources and the knowledge and the expertise of the people from that world to do so. And so in that way, he just acts as an entity of that world. However, it's colonial in its assumptions for its eugenicist assumptions, like the fact that becoming human is the ultimate state of being, that monsters are inherently lesser, that Rimuru trusts power because he's the protagonist, but there's also, elements of that where he's just more right to rule because he's a more entitled, level-headed person because of being isekai'd, right?
Sure.
While the actions Rimuru takes are not necessarily colonial upon the world, the colonial mindsets seep into the world building itself.
Yes. Ooh, that's we've definitely had this conversation before, but like, if the world itself is colonial, right? It was a decision on the author's part, perhaps an unconscious one, to make the world work that way.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're not saying, like, again, because I'm pretty experienced with, like, either sometimes they're curious, sometimes they're bad faith, but the responses to things like this, they're saying, like, we're not saying that, like, slime is going to make people want to go out and do a colonialism.
I'm saying that cancel slime.
Cancel slime.
Hey,
it's dangerous.
I will fight you. Like, I enjoy Slime a lot. I'm caught up on it. I watch it weekly. It is a fun show. It's got a lot of flaws. It's definitely got sexism in its character designs, and yet it also gives a lot more agency to women characters than media in this genre tends to. It can have both. I think it can have both. Don't watch the OVA. There's just a fan service episode.
Okay.
It's fine. Yeah, but that doesn't mean, like, I'm critical of it because I've seen so much of it. I can be this critical because I've enjoyed watching it and I pay attention while watching it, right?
Also, Emma is, like, normal. Like, she watches things that she enjoys, and she doesn't watch things that she doesn't enjoy.
She doesn't have a friend she can't let watch redo of Killer alone.
So there's that.
I'm adding you.
I'm adding myself. It's okay. It was an invitation to add.
But another thing, like, a lot of isekai will do is build its world off of sort of Western fantasy, right? Like
Western
there will
Europe?
be a lot of
Hate that shit.
Western European fantasy in its trappings.
Mm-hmm.
And that is sort of assumed to be the ideal civilizations are always ones based on Western societies.
Or I will offer you a slight addendum of not necessarily always the ideal civilizations, but the assumed default.
Yes.
This is what's normal for a fantasy. This is what fantasy means. Fantasy means things that are white coded.
Yep.
So weird. Like, I've honestly seen more fantasy anime set in, like, medieval Europe than I have in, like, medieval Japan, which sucks. Because medieval Japan is really cool.
Yeah.
Medieval Japan is so cool. Like, like the entire tradition of, like, samurai and, like, shoguns and, like, all that sort of stuff. It's like you could really get lost in there. But no,
Well, it's really
we just have to have, like,
complicated.
it's super complicated. But, like, we need to instead have, like, another 50th anime about King Schassenbalchenschnitzel and, like, his daughter Meli Malimuli, the 15th, and how she's a bitch actually, and like we have to have like the and like all the knights are this and that, and like we don't have to do that.
Speaking about a king and his daughter, let's talk about the best isekai, Log Horizon.
Okay, let's do it.
Wow.
So Log Horizon, I'll be honest, I only got back to watching Log Horizon because of Mo. I don't think Mo knows this.
Aw.
But so a friend showed me the first couple episodes of Log Horizon because it was a show that he really likes and we were going to watch it together and it was relevant to a project he was working on. So I watched it. It was fine. I thought it was really clever and cool, but it didn't do anything super special in the first couple episodes. It was just like cool storytelling in the genre. And because it doesn't really get into the specific framing of NPCs as people of the land, as people who are indigenous to this world and who have a established society in this world until after the first arc. And so I stopped right before it got good, but I saw Mo tweeting about how like Log Horizon's so great. So I was like, okay, let's go see what this is about because I trust Mo. I didn't even read more. I was just like, all right, Mo likes this. I'm sure it'll be good. So I went to my friend and like, hey, you want to stream more Log Horizon for me? And he said, sure. And I've been hooked since. And
way too
what
much
it does
pressure.
is it begins systematically looking at the things that we assume to be true about a game and trying to make them make sense in a real functional world.
Right.
And so the NPCs quickly become called the people of the land. The isekai people are adventurers because that is their role as MMO players, right? A Log Horizon takes place in a MMO where the players log in for the new update and find themselves trapped and can't log off. And what quickly happens is you have to create a social order where people who thought they were just playing a game realize they are living here now.
Yeah.
And it does a lot of neat things. Like some of the small things that it does is like frame quests as people of the land having been tricking adventurers this entire time by offering them random shit they had on hand so that the adventurers could do the things they wanted. Like it gives agency to the NPCs in a way that very few media does.
Right.
And that's super cool.
Isn't there like a big moment in in one of the Log Horizon seasons where they like have a person of the land who transcends the person of the land adventurer boundary?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a really good.
Yeah.
I remember thinking that was like a really good moment just because of how it like in a way that other isekai that are a lot more subtle about their adventurer person of the land class divide, like a lot of isekai don't explicitly draw attention to that divide, but in a very real sense it's uncrossable, right? There are the people with the privilege to be adventurers and the people without it, and like that's just, you can't change it. But in Log Horizon, even though it's explicit in acknowledging that divide, it like has at least one exception. I have not been keeping up.
At
Perhaps
the point where
Yeah, there's at least. And in general, like one of the big themes about Log Horizon, this is less like a political thing, but like one of Log Horizon's big messages is that basically every time characters treat this like a game in which people are disposable, they're usually punished for it. And when they treat it like a real life thing, where like, this is a little bit abstract, but like for example, in food, right? There's a sort of a side quest where people try and figure out how to make food taste good, because food tastes like absolute dog shit in this world, right?
It tastes like nothing.
Yeah.
They just eat it and it's got no flavor.
And so they try what most of the guilds assume is that there's like some like game mechanic that they're not exploiting or they're not setting. But it turns out the way to make food taste good is to just cook it. Like put it in the stove instead of opening your cook menu and crafting a burger. Just cook the burger and it will taste better. Similarly, with the people of the land, if you treat them like NPCs in a video game, then it will not work out for you politically. If you treat them like a group of people, you know, with like a culture and a history and with something to offer, they will give you the stuff that they have to offer.
And it's cool because like different people have different strengths. Like the cooking thing is discovered by a person who was the chef subclass and turns out and is just the all-around best character, Nyanta, who is a cat person swashbuckler. I call him Nyanners because he's great. I love him. He's just the most wholesome being. He fight good. He cook good. 10 out of 10.
Yes.
And the show consistently explores all of those implications, right? Like even the like appearance of adventurers the first time is later explained to us as a world event done by the people of the land to exert their agency to bring in help that they needed.
Right.
And the exchanges done between the adventurers and the people of the land is all done as like two groups exchanging, where one is not inherently seen as superior, even though the adventurers are kind of like stronger because they are the adventurers and have the power to like beat people up. And we see the negative implications of that in some of the societies that aren't our main protagonist group.
Yeah.
That like end up being more fascist.
Yeah,
more
there are like some
dictatorships.
pretty open fasci, open well, it's all like coded in like video game mechanics, so it doesn't feel this dark, but there's definitely like legitimate slave societies that end up forming by some of the other like non-protagonist aligned people.
I just wanted to really quickly mention, I think it's possible to argue that Log Horizon argues for the public ownership of services necessary for life, and argues that when such services are privatized or consolidated in the hands of the few, it leads to fascism.
I would agree with that take, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah, and so like actually, oh, good.
In season 1, do they like bring up the church?
Yeah,
Like the one group who like privately owns the church.
that's brought up at the end of season 1. Yes.
Yeah.
So one of the cities, a group like buys the resurrection spot and controls resurrection in that town, and basically runs a dictatorship by being able to kill anyone and being like, we control whether you can live here and we can exile you by banning you from resurrecting here.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing that happens. Like the government that they in season 3, Shiro says it's not a government, but it is.
It's a government.
It is. It is
a government.
But the government that ends up forming the Round Table Alliance, one of the first things they do is they like, obviously people can like live sort of, because it is still a video game, but they make sure everyone gets like food, they make sure everyone gets shelter, they make sure everyone gets like training to whatever sort of vocation that they want to do. There's definitely like, I'm not sure if I could say it's like communism or socialism, but there's definitely like a sense of there is like a societal role to provide people with the things that they need to like live comfortably.
Yep. And that's actually a thing I think that Slime also does really well, is that like Rimuru creates this monster society, and there's never the impression that anyone wants in that society, right? Everyone is given enough to survive and supports one another and fulfills different roles. There doesn't seem to be any sort of internal economy. The economy is exclusively done to interact with others in the world according to like their systems of trade, right? And I think that's one of the things that Slime does really well. Like, while it doesn't tackle it as directly as Lock Horizon, it also has Rimuru acting within the framework of the world, treating the others in the world as equals, both isekai and non-isekai. And there's actually, in like the most recent episodes, Rimuru like realizes he had a bias towards isekai people over the non-isekai people, and that was wrong to an extent. It's not as explicit, but it's the themes that are being played around with, which is neat.
Interesting.
Yeah. With that being said, thank you all
for sticking
so
through.
much.
If you watch to the end of this and you're watching on YouTube, comment grape juice. I want to run an experiment. Just comment grape juice. And I'll see who comments grape juice. Or like do it on Twitter, just at MoBlack, grape juice.
And
do not provide an explanation. Do not pass go.
And if you're here, my request for you will be to read Can the Subaltern Speak by Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak.
I feel like this is CWT's version of Read Settler.
This is CWT's version of the two genders. Comment grape juice and read Spivak. Like we have a gender reveal party every hour. It's either grape juice or a copy of Kevin Subaltern Speak. Anyway, that being said, I'm Raghava. My pronouns are anything other than he or she.
And I'm Mo, he, him, and this has been Emmer.
Hi. Yeah, that's me. I'm Amar Ramirez.
Plug your things.
Okay. Yeah. So hi, I'm Amaraz. Any pronouns except he. Mostly can be found on Twitter at Amaraz, which sort of works as the central hub. I've got a couple other projects. Let's see, what can I talk about right now? I'm on the Musafir's podcast, season 2. We're prepping towards. It is a fantasy tabletop role-playing podcast set in a South Asian inspired fantasy setting with a majority South Asian cast plus me. Just kind of chilling there. I don't know why they have me. It's fine. It's a lot of fun. Our first season sort of wrapped up and is in D&D, but in our second season we're looking at a new system. In the meantime, I'll be running a one-shot. That'll be a lot of fun, so you can listen into that. You can hear my voice on a bunch of other places. That's the main one that I can talk about right now. I also do freelance game design. You can check it out. Some of my work on itch.io, amaraz.itch.io.
I hear you made a game that won every award.
I did. I made a game that won every award, and if you don't believe me, go check it out and then give it more awards because it's already won them. That's it. I have various things. A lot of my things are fleeting, so Twitter's the best place to find out about them as they're happening. Yeah.
And all of this will be linked in places. And yeah, we will see you all next time. More guests. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Before you stop recording, let's do a count because I don't think we did a count at the beginning.
No, we did not.
Okay. Cool. Awesome. Amazing. 1.
We're so good at this.
2, 3, 4,
4,
5,
6,
7, 8, 9,
9,
10.
10.
Good job.
Way to go, team.
Good job.
That count felt like it was slowing down as it was going, and we were all slowing down to like match up one another's slowdowns.
Yeah, this happens with our counts a lot.
This always happens. I will say, running out of time is the best reason to stop an episode because that just means we had so much to say. And honestly, I feel like